On today's show, Houston Rockets basketball is back, baby.
Hey, Houston fans, I am so happy.
3 things we want to see out of the Houston Rockets preseason opener against the Utah Jazz. It's all coming up on today's Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Houston Rockets basketball is back, and I cannot wait to see the guys back in action.
Oh my.
What is up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets, like, comment, subscribe. The best thing that you can do to help us grow the show is to listen every single day on whatever podcast platform you prefer. Apple, Spotify, any of them. Just pick your favorite platform, go listen to the show. It helps us out a ton. Now, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you so much for being an everydayer. We made it, guys. We made it through the offseason. It's always tough. You make it through the offseason, and we are back. We are back, baby. Houston Rockets basketball. I know it's preseason, but we are hype, and it's going to be, I cannot wait to see this group in action. It's going to be so much fun. I am overjoyed. I am wearing, if you're watching on YouTube, I had to rock, it is a Monday edition of Locked On Rockets, which means I had to rock the Margarita Monday look, courtesy of the Houston Rockets marketing department. I love this shirt, guys. It's one of the best things that I own. All right, so on today's show, we're going to get into kind of preseason expectations and 3 things that we would hope to see or that we want to see out of this Houston Rockets group, not just in this very first preseason game, but kind of across preseason as a whole. But it'll be really great if we could see some of this stuff in game 1. It would provide some confidence moving forward. Pardon me. About the group and about kind of the direction that the team is heading this season. So first things first, just to reiterate a note from the other day, Ime Udoka did say to us that he was planning to rest a lot of guys across at least these first 2 preseason games. His expectation is that he's resting 3 guys against the Jazz and then another 3 guys against the OKC Thunder. And when asked who he was going to be resting, he highlighted that he was going to be resting the old guys, guys coming off of injury, and guys who played overseas in the Olympics, which narrows it down to about 6 names on the roster. Fred VanVleet, Dillon Brooks, Steven Adams, Tari Eason, Jock Landale, and why am I blanking on one? Jeff Green. There we go. So basically, old guys, guys coming off injury, and guys who played in the Olympics. I made the call originally that, I think in this first game, it's going to be some combination, probably, I don't know, like Steven Adams, Tari Eason, and I guess Fred VanVleet probably sitting this first game. Or maybe they flip it and they decide, they want to sit. I can't imagine that he's going to sit Fred and Dillon in the same game. So I imagine one of them is going to play and one of them is going to sit. That way you're not missing 2 of the 5 Rockets starters in game 1 of the preseason. Maybe he'll opt to sit Dillon and play Tari, and then maybe this will be the game where Jeff sits ultimately. I don't know. 3 guys are going to be sitting in this game and 3 guys are going to be sitting in the next game. And then TBD down the line on whether or not we see the full squad in effect on the first preseason home opener against the New Orleans Pelicans next week. Hopefully we do. It'd be a nice treat for all the fans to get a quick look at everybody up and down the roster. But let's get into the handful of things. And we're also a little later in the episode. I want to kind of take a step back and look at the league at large and a few of the different things going on with some of the other teams and how some of these early injuries are bound to help the Houston Rockets this season that we're seeing, crop up already across some of the other competition that the Rockets are being facing this year. But the handful of things that we really want to see out of this first preseason game, I think the very first thing, and this has been something that we've been talking about literally since post All-Star break last season, and that's the Houston Rockets playing a faster pace or playing a faster brand of basketball, playing with more pace, right? And this has been a talking point since post All-Star break last year. This has been a talking point all through media day and training camp. This is a group that is trying to play a lot faster this season. Now, it's not as simple as just saying, oh, we're going to play faster. What does playing faster mean? What does it look like? Who does it help? And I think these are all the things that are going to be important to see in action. And we're not going to get all these answers from one preseason game, literally the first preseason game, but it'll be interesting to see just how different this group looks, especially on the offensive end of the floor in game one of the preseason, right? How much have they really worked on pushing tempo after getting a good defensive stop? What do some of their offensive sets look like, right? Who's doing the heavy lifting offensively? For me, I really do hope that we see just an overall, again, a faster brand of basketball. Last season, the Rockets played very, very, at times painfully slow on the offensive end. And again, they did that as directed by Ime Udoka in order to cut down on turnovers, in order to be able to clean up their transition defense, all these different things. And like there was a method to the madness for Ime Udoka last season and why the Houston Rockets played so slowly. Now it's about, okay, can they play fast? First off, it's not even can they play faster? They absolutely can play faster than they did last season. The real question is, what does it look like with them playing faster? And also, coming off of that, can they still sustain their defensive philosophies while playing faster? That to me is going to be the biggest question mark. When we go back and look at the post All-Star break numbers for the Houston Rockets, when they started playing faster post All-Star break, their defensive numbers also slipped. Now, some of that does have to do with Alperen and Sengun being out. Like realistically, they're only big on the roster. And then when you play small, when you move Jabari to the 5 and put him in the starting lineup, it's a very different dynamic with that 5-man lineup than what you had with Alperen Sengun in the middle. And yes, they had some, serviceable minutes from Jock, Landale to close out the season, but I don't think you can take that and look at it as a full picture, like, okay, well, what does this team actually look like defensively with a faster pace? But I do think that there is something there where there's a little bit of give and take, right? If you're going to play faster, you are prone to you're prone to have some maybe defensive lapses or making some mistakes on that side of the floor, or at least it makes it easier to make mistakes on that side of the floor. So how does this group look playing faster, and are they able to stay locked in defensively? Are they able to stick to their defensive principles while playing a faster brand of basketball? And at the end of the day, who does the faster brand of basketball benefit? Honestly, it benefits everybody up and down the roster. Like every single player on this Houston Rockets roster can benefit from playing a faster brand of basketball. There are some Rockets fans that are convinced that Alperen Sengun cannot play a faster brand of basketball. He absolutely can. Alperen Sengun is not your like old school back to the basket plotting big man. He absolutely has some speed and some tempo to his game. I mean, think about the times where he likes to rip down a rebound and he's not even looking to pass it to one of his guards. He's the one booking it up the court, trying to make something happen. Sengun can play at a faster speed. It doesn't have to all be slow it down in the half court, dumping him into him in the post. That is a way that the Rockets can access their half court offense. That is something that they relied on heavily last year. But I mean, across the board, all the athletes on the roster, Jalen Green, Cam Whitmore, Ime Thompson, Tari, Eason, even the guys you don't think of as traditional athletes are going to benefit from a faster pace of play. Alperen Sengun, Jabari Smith Jr., more offensive reps, more possessions, more opportunities. And I think at the end of the day, Ime talked about this a little bit. They missed out on a lot of opportunities to generate high quality shots because they were playing so slowly. They almost forced themselves a lot of the time last season to play in the half court. And that is really tough to do, to only execute in half court offense, right? You gotta be really on your P's and Q's if that's the only opportunities you're giving yourself. So I'm expecting a fast-paced, high-octane Houston Rockets team. And what does that do to their defense ultimately at the end of the day? Coming up, I want to get into the other couple categories, other couple things that we are looking for out of this first preseason game. And across the preseason as a whole, we want to see a more balanced offense, and we want to see the good version. We want to see the consistent version of Jalen Green. Coming up, we're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. Look, October is the season for wearing masks and costumes, but some of us feel like we wear a mask and hide more often than we want to. It could be at work, in social settings, or maybe even around your family. Therapy can help you learn to accept all parts of yourself so you can take off the mask, because masks should be for Halloween fun, not for your emotions. Look, I've done therapy in the past. I found it to be an incredibly cathartic experience having an unbiased professional third party kind of walk me through some of the stuff I was dealing with in my own day-to-day life. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Take off the mask with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off of your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, now you may be asking yourself, damn, Jackson, why aren't we talking about like lineups or rotations or, minutes distribution or any of this other stuff for these preseason games? As much as I would love to glean some information about what the Rockets rotations and lineups are going to look like this season, as illustrated by segment one, if Ime is going to rest 3 guys against the Jazz and then another 3 guys against the OKC Thunder, and assuming that those guys are staples of the rotation, which I'm sure that they are, the guys that Ime is likely to rest are going to be big parts of the Rockets rotation, it's going to be really hard to take away anything as far as substitution patterns or who's playing what role and stuff like that. So unfortunately, until we get a look at the Rockets playing their full roster, their full squad, or their full, 9, 10-man guys that we expect to be the mainstays of the rotation, until we see that happen, then we're not going to be able to get a kind of a big picture look at, okay, well, this is how Ime's planning to use Reed Shepherd, and he's going to get these minutes, and this will be the first sub off the bench, and all this stuff. Hopefully we get that in the first home preseason game against the New Orleans Pelicans. Hopefully Ime just does the resting stuff on the road, and then we get our first kind of preview look at the Rockets, a holistic preview look at the Rockets against the Pelicans a little bit further down the line next week. So right now we're just gonna be focusing on trends, focusing on some of the stuff that the Rockets have highlighted that they want to do better. Now, one of the things that I got the chance to ask Ime Udoka about at the final day of training camp was how much of the offense is going to be predicated on Fred VanVleet, Alperen, Sengun pick and roll. Because last season, a lot of it was built around Alperen, Sengun, Fred VanVleet pick and roll. So much so that, pardon me, so much so that Ime Udoka wound up mirroring the minutes of Fred and Alp together to where they played almost all of their minutes exclusively with one another on the floor, because that was the bread and butter of the Houston Rockets offense. And when Fred was off the floor, the Rockets offense kind of came to a screeching halt at times last season. So when I asked Ime about kind of how much of that the offense is going to be centered on that versus kind of, trying to get other guys incorporated, he said that they want a more balanced offensive approach, right? They want to be able to involve other guys. And I think that is going to be another key area that I'm looking forward to seeing what that actually looks like this season for the Rockets. We know that for the most part, Ime's talked about the fact that he kept the offense pretty vanilla last season. It was, again, a lot of Fred VanVleet, Alperen, Sengun pick and roll, a lot of dumping the ball down to Alperen, Sengun in the post. And then as the season progressed, we started to see Jaylen Green start to take off a little bit, and he became more of a focal point of the Rockets offense, to where then we started seeing some Jaylen Green pick and roll sets with, whether it was with Alperen, Sengun, or just Jaylen Green pick and roll with the bench unit guys. And then the offense started running a little bit more through Jaylen, or at least effectively through Jaylen, because we did see in the early part of the season when Ime tried to have Jalen Green kind of steering the bench unit of guys, we saw the offense going through Jalen. It just didn't look very good early on. So what does the offense ultimately look like for the Rockets? Because at the end of the day, yes, they can play with a faster pace. They can push tempo. They can try to get out in transition off of good stops, off of misses, things like that. But you're not going to play in transition every single possession. You're just not. It's not realistic. That's one of the things that you have to account for in the NBA landscape is, yes, throughout the regular season especially, you can play a high-octane, up-tempo style of basketball, but eventually you're going to run into a team or teams throughout the regular season, and then this also happens every year in the postseason. The game slows down. What does your offense look like? What can you get to? What are your strengths in the half court when you're not able to get out and run in transition, right? And for me, I'm very curious to see what the Rockets do this season to diversify their offense. Just looking at their starters, right? Just looking at the expected starting lineup, Fred VanVleet, Jalen Green, Dillon Brooks, Jabari Smith Jr., Alperen Sengun. Obviously, if Jalen Green is able to pick up where he left off from, then we should still see a very steady diet of not only Fred VanVleet and Alperen Sengun pick and roll, but we should also see a lot of Jalen Green and Alperen Sengun pick and roll early on, right? We should see a lot of two-man game between both of those sets of guys rather than just Fred VanVleet and it being kind of one-dimensional where every possession down, it's Fred with the ball in his hands, Alp setting the screen, and then working from there, right? That makes things a little bit more dynamic. It allows Fred to move more into that off-ball role, and it gives Jalen to do what he does best, which is get downhill and attack a defense, right, with a strong screen from Alperen Sengun. Now, I think the low-hanging fruit here for the Rockets offense, because obviously you can also put the ball in Alp's hands from pretty much anywhere on the floor. You can throw it to him in the low block, you can pass it to him on the short roll after he sets a screen, or you can give it to him at the top of the key and let him go to work, right? There's a lot of different options to run the offense through Alperen Sengun. The low-hanging fruit here, and the one that I really hope we're going to see a little bit more of this season, and it might not be when the starters are in the game, it might be more so when the Rockets start staggering things and when the bench brigade kind of takes over. I want to see Jabari Smith Jr. get a little bit more offensive opportunity. I have been banging this drum for I don't know how long, but I think this is the year where we see Jabari Smith Jr. empowered by Ime Udoka to do a little bit more offensively, right? Whether that means putting Jabari in the high post and letting him go to work, whether that means posting him up, whether that means letting him operate on the perimeter, or at the end of the day, even letting him, tap into his ability as a movement shooter. He talked about spending time working on that this offseason, coming off pin downs, coming off screens, having the confidence to let it fly if he's got any kind of breathing room after a teammate opens him up. That's going to be an easy avenue for Jabari to increase his overall volume, increase his three-point attempts. I just want to say, I feel like there is still so much untapped potential there with Jabari because we've seen glimpses of it through his first 2 years in the NBA. You see the moments where when Jabari gets the ball in the middle of the floor in the mid to high post, where he is able to face up a defender or put them on his back and get to his little turnaround fadeaway or just face them up and shoot over the top. It's there and it's a reliable shot. And I think it's something that the Rockets can maybe not build their entire offense around, but I feel like it's at least something that they can cater to a little bit more this season in order to diversify things offensively. Because think about it, if you give the ball to Jabari Smith Jr. and he's at the elbow and he's facing up his defender, then you can have some off-ball action happening where Alperen Sengun is setting a flare screen for Jalen Green or Dillon Brooks or Fred VanVleet for them to come off and have a wide-open three or set the screen for Jalen Green and have him duck towards the rim on a kind of a backdoor cut. You can have some misdirection happening where you can have a combination of Fred, Jalen, and Alpi all staggered on the weak side and, have some split cut actions happening. There's so many different things that you can do. And I think Jabari is maybe not, I'm not going to say Jabari has amazing court vision or anything, but he can make simple, easy reads, especially if somebody gets opened up by, a simple misdirection play on the weak side of the ball. So to me, I want to see how the Rockets are trying to diversify their offense. And that also extends to the bench unit of guys, right? We're just talking about the starters here and we don't even know which of the starters are going to play or not play, at this point in the game. But the other area that I feel like the Rockets are bound to explore more of this season is, and I've said this before, but putting the ball in Ime Thompson's hands, right? Do we get any or how many Ime Thompson on-ball reps do we get out of this game? Do we see Ime Thompson running some of the offense for the Houston Rockets second unit? How much responsibility is given to Reed Sheppard versus Ime Thompson in running that second unit? Fred VanVleet can't do it all. Fred VanVleet cannot run the offense for all 48 minutes. Now, Jalen Green has grown and evolved to a point where I feel like Ime can trust Jalen to run the offense when Fred isn't on the floor. How much trust is Ime willing to put in the hands of a rookie in Reed Sheppard and a second-year player in Ime Thompson to play to their strengths with the second unit? Is Ime going to be forced to stagger Fred VanVleet and Jalen Green, and is it going to be the Jalen Green show when Fred VanVleet isn't on the court? Or are we going to see more of the same style of offense where Fred is the table setter when he's on the floor and Jalen's coming off screens and he's the one catching and finishing plays, catching the ball and finishing plays? And does that extend to the bench? Right? Is Reed Sheppard going to be the guy with the keys to the offense, setting up guys like Cam Whitmore and Ime Thompson, or vice versa? Is it going to be Ime Thompson setting up guys like Cam and Reed? That's going to be a really big question, or that is a really big question that I have in how the Houston Rockets offense ultimately looks here in this first preseason game and ultimately through the early stages of this season. What kind of experimentation are we going to see from the coaching staff, from Ime Udoka offensively to try and balance the Houston Rockets offensive identity instead of it just being so heavily predicated on the success of the two-man game between Alperen, Sengun, and Fred VanVleet? Coming up, want to get to the final thing that we want to see out of Houston Rockets preseason, as well as how injuries around the league are set to help the Houston Rockets early on this year. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Look, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the exact same page where you actually place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Just head on over to FanDuel.com. You take a look at all sorts of different odds concerning the NFL. You take a look at different division winners, conference winners, season awards, or just the outright Super Bowl favorites. Right now, the Chiefs are plus 500, the 49ers plus 700, the Ravens at plus 750 right behind them, and then in a three-way tie for fourth place best odds, the Houston Texans, the Detroit Lions, and the Buffalo Bills all at plus 1100. Shout out to Ime Fairbairn. Oh my God, what a great kick that was to seal the game against the Bills. My goodness. For all those odds and so much more, just head on over to FanDuel.com. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, final thing that we want to see out of not just this preseason game, but the early part of preseason and well into this Rockets NBA season. Jalen Green. What version of Jalen Green do the Houston Rockets get to start this year? What version of Jalen Green are we going to see Monday night against the Utah Jazz? All signs are pointing to a Jalen Green that has turned the chapter, that has become a better, more well-rounded player, a better defender, better playmaker, better rebounder, better decision maker, better understanding of where he can be effective on the floor. I know that he's put in a lot of work this offseason, kind of refining certain skills in order to elevate his game this year. And I think one of the other things that's so important to highlight here is the amount of self-awareness and self-reflection that it feels like Jalen Green did this offseason. We talked about it on the show the other day, but him highlighting one of the reasons that he was working with Coach Dash and working on his balance, his timing, things like that this offseason, that he understands sometimes he can get sped up offensively, right? Sometimes he's playing too fast, a little too loose, a little too chaotic, and that leads to mistakes, right? That leads to inefficient offense, what have you. At Rockets Media Day, he also highlighted with Matt Thomas on the Matt Thomas Show with Ross, I might add. He highlighted in his radio interview that, for him, when asked about consistency and like, what that looks like for him is he said that there's going to be nights where he shoots, like 3 of 17, but he needs to still be able to find ways to help his team when his shot isn't falling, right? Can he still be a good defender? Is he still playmaking at a high level? Is he rebounding? Is he doing all the other things on the floor? Because that's what star players do. Is every night's not going to be his night. But at the end of the day, and this is the important part of the equation, is when you are such an important part of the offense, yes, not every night's going to be your night. Yes, you're going to have some rough games in there, but it's kind of a twofold thing. What do you do in a given game when you find yourself struggling, when the shot's not falling, when every 3 you put up is clanking off the back iron or whatever? What do you do in a given game to try and get yourself going? I've highlighted it before. There's some low-hanging fruit there. Getting to the free throw line is what star players do to get themselves going. Manufacturing points at the free throw line is a star level ability. Can Jalen Green get better at manufacturing points at the free throw line? He's a great free throw shooter when he gets to the line, some odd 80%, right? Like that's really solid shooting from the free throw line. Can he get there more often this season? And then secondly, he needs to just not have as many of those off shooting nights. Like that's just point blank. It's fantastic that he has become a more well-rounded player. It's incredible that Ime Udoka has been able to build Jalen Green into a more well-rounded player, and the fact that he is a more capable defender and rebounder, and he's a better decision maker and playmaker, all these things. But if you are going to be the number 1 or number 2 option on a team that is vying for a playoff spot, that is trying to make some postseason noise, you just can't have multiple consecutive games where you're shooting, where you're just off, right? Yeah, players get into slumps here and there, all that kind of stuff. It happens to everyone. But the best players, the players who are true blue, number 1, number 2 options on their respective teams, they find a way to get it done every night. It might not be pretty. You might have a night where you do go, 5 of 18 or whatever, but if you're 5 of 18 from the floor, you better be like 10 of 12 from the stripe or something, getting yourself going elsewhere, right? Finding other ways to score. You might as well, or you better have racked up, 5, 6, 7, 8 assists, because maybe your shot is not going, but if the defense is still honoring you as a first option, if the defense is still loading up on you and trying to slow you down, then are you using your scoring gravity to open up and create opportunities for your teammates? And are you capitalizing on those chances? Are your teammates capitalizing on those chances, right? The Rockets only go so far as Jalen Green takes them this season. So what version of Jalen Green do the Houston Rockets get right out of the gate? Not going to judge anything based off preseason, not even going to judge anything based off the season opener. We need like a large sample size, right? We need like a 15, 20 game sample size, about a quarter of the season, right? Before we can start looking at kind of big picture conclusions of, okay, like how are things going? We're going to do like a quarter season check-in on where the Rockets are at, where Jalen Green is at, right? How things look. I'm cautiously optimistic, though, that we are closer to seeing the March version of Jalen Green, and that's the version, or closer to that version, of what we'll see on opening night or preseason opening night and early this Rockets season, as opposed to the version of Jalen Green that we saw in the first half of last season, where there was the inconsistencies, the up and down play, all of that. And again, if Jalen Green can do that, then he will absolutely cement himself as one of the most important pieces, if not maybe the most important piece of this Houston Rockets rebuild, if he can get to that point. So this is a big year for Jalen Green. It's big. We've talked about this I don't know how many different times. It's a huge year for Jalen Green. It's a pivotal point in his career, not just with the Houston Rockets, but his NBA career at large. Now, really quickly here, want to just highlight that there are already a bunch of injuries around the association that are set to help the Houston Rockets. Just looking at some of the division rivals for the Houston Rockets, the Pelicans, Trey Murphy III is dealing with a hamstring injury, and he's going to be reevaluated in 3 weeks. The Mavericks, Dante Exum has a right wrist injury that's going to probably need surgery, and he is out with no return timetable. Luka Doncic is dealing with a calf strain. Maxi Kleber has an ankle sprain. Kyrie Irving is dealing with some I guess, issues with his left hand that was like surgically repaired this offseason. The Grizzlies are dealing with, obviously, Gigi Jackson's been out for a while. That news has been out for a minute. But Jaren Jackson Jr. is dealing with some hamstring soreness. Like, these are all really important injuries across the landscape of not just, it's not even just the division, although it happens to be 3 division rivals, which is huge: the Grizzlies, the Pelicans, and the Mavericks. What this means for the Rockets is just, if these teams start to falter even a little bit early on, like, the Rockets are going to need all, as good as we expect the Rockets to be this season, they're also going to need a little bit of help to make the playoffs. Like, they're going to need 1 to 3 teams to kind of falter and take a step back and regress a little bit compared to where they were last year in order to carve themselves out a spot in the Western Conference playoff race. It's very easy to look at the Clippers as the most likely team to plummet a little bit in the Western Conference standings after losing Paul George, and there's concerns about Kawhi Leonard's health, and he's probably not even going to be ready for the start of the season, and James Harden's talking about, playing his old style of basketball, and Ty Lue leaning into a James Harden-centric offense, but he's, 34 years old, 35 years old now? I mean, James is old. Like, can he handle that level of offensive production on a night in, night out basis, and can it look good at his current age? Who knows, right? Maybe he can, maybe he can't. But the Rockets are going to have to bypass a few teams in the standings to make the playoffs. And while we do not wish injuries upon other players, injuries are the worst thing. If you could turn on the slider and disable injuries like you do in 2K, you do it immediately, right? You want to see every team play at their peak, with everybody healthy, all that good stuff. But injuries are a part of the sport. And if injuries slow down some of the Rockets' playoff competition and give them a leg up in the early part of the season, because they are healthy across the board, knock on wood, knock on every piece of wood you can find, the Rockets are healthy coming out of the gate. And that's going to be huge for this team. And health moving forward is going to be huge for this team. And the benefit of having all the depth that the Rockets do have is they shouldn't have to overly rely on any one player. Ideally, I'm looking at you, Fred, or I guess I'm looking at you, Ime, not to rely on Fred, but they shouldn't have to overly rely on one player to the point of burning them out or wearing them down to the point of increased injury risk. Now, I'm not sitting here saying like Fred VanVleet's going to like rest back-to-backs or anything like that drastic, but just getting the minutes load down a little bit, right? If you can hover, Fred, around 32, 33 minutes a game, something like that, then that helps a ton in the grand scheme of things. It keeps him fresh longer, and it reduces the overall risk for injury. It reduces the overall risk for him missing time at any point this season. So with that, I am so incredibly excited for the start of this Houston Rockets season. I think this is a special group, and I cannot wait to see what they achieve. And it all tips off tonight against the Utah Jazz. On that note, I want to know how you feel, what you're excited for, what you're looking forward to in this first preseason game from the Rockets. What are your expectations? How do you feel about what we talked about in today's episode? A quick reminder, again, the best way you can help our show out is to listen every single day. Even if you're a YouTube viewer, go download the podcast on Apple, Spotify, whatever your preferred podcast platform is. Sincerely, it helps the show a ton. But as always, thank you so much for tuning in. I want to give a quick birthday shout out here at the end of the show to my guy, Matt. Happy 32nd birthday. I know you're an everydayer, man. Thank you so much for tuning in. But as always, thank you so much for checking out the show. If you haven't done so yet, guys, subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.